Hi, good morning everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We are Group 7, and for this presentation, we'll be discussing our assessment of KiwiTel's privacy governance and how its business practices align, or in this case, fail to align, with the legal requirements set out in the New Zealand Privacy Act 2020. Throughout this session, we will walk you through the legal issues that may arise from KiwiTel's operations, the potential consequences of non-compliance, and practical steps the company can take to reduce its risks and strengthen its privacy framework. So to begin, let's take a quick look at KiwiTel and its current situation. KiwiTel is a major telecommunications provider in New Zealand and is responsible for managing sensitive personal data from millions of users. Due to the scale of its operations, it relies heavily on external vendors and third-party service providers to manage core parts of its IT systems and digital infrastructure. However, this outsourcing has contributed to significant gaps in privacy governance. Our analysis has revealed that KiwiTel lacks the necessary controls and oversight mechanisms to properly protect user data, and these deficiencies have resulted in multiple legal and ethical concerns. In today's privacy-focused environment, where data breaches and regulatory enforcement are becoming more frequent and severe, such gaps could lead to serious legal liabilities, financial penalties, and reputational damage. Hence why it's essential for KiwiTel to re-evaluate its data governance strategy. So what are the legal issues KiwiTel is facing? Let's break this down based on key principles from the Information Privacy Act. First, under the Information Privacy Principle 5, organizations are required to have reasonable security safeguards in place to protect personal information. KiwiTel, unfortunately, has been found lacking in this area. Access controls have been unintentionally disabled by third-party providers, which suggest weak internal governance and poor oversight of external partnerships. Second, KiwiTel is in breach of IPP 9, which states that personal data should not be kept longer than necessary. The company has failed to regularly review its data retention policies, meaning unnecessary information remains stored in its systems, increasing the risk of exposure. Third, there's evidence of potential violations of IPP 11, which concerns the improper disclosure of personal data. If data is shared without proper authorization or sufficient safeguards, KiwiTel could be held liable. Finally, the lack of employee training and clearly defined roles contributes to systemic non-compliance. Employees may not fully understand their responsibilities under the law, leading to accidental breaches or failures in data handling. So let's dive deeper into the first issue, which is inadequate security. Under IPP 5, organizations like KiwiTel are required to protect personal information using safeguards that are appropriate to the risk involved. However, we found that KiwiTel systems are vulnerable due to inconsistent security practices and misconfigurations introduced by external service providers. For example, access control settings were unintentionally disabled, which left certain systems exposed. This kind of oversight not only undermines user trust, but also makes the company susceptible to cyber attacks and data leaks. From a legal standpoint, this is a clear violation of IPP 5 and could result in financial penalties or formal enforcement by the Office of the Privacy Commissioner. More importantly, the reputational harm from such incidents can be long-lasting. To address this, KiwiTel should implement a unified security framework that applies both internally and to all third-party vendors. This includes regular risk assessments, encryption protocols, and role-based access controls to ensure that data is only accessible by authorized personnel. Another critical issue is the improper disclosure of personal data. Under IPP 11, organizations must not disclose personal information unless they have a lawful basis and reasonable grounds for doing so. In KiwiTel's case, there's a risk that personal data may be inadvertently made available to parties who should not have access to it, either through system design flaws, staff error, or miscommunication with third-party providers. This kind of disclosure can result in severe regulatory consequences. Civil liability is also a concern. Affected individuals may sue the company for breach of privacy, especially if the data involved includes financial details, communications, or location information. To prevent this, KiwiTel must adopt a privacy by design approach. That means data protection should be embedded into the architecture of every new systems and process. Additionally, all staff should receive training on how to handle data responsibly, and strict rules should govern how and when data can be shared externally.
Thank you for Greg sharing about the first part. I guess it gives a very clear idea on the basic structure of KiwiTel and some of the major key obligations and implications. So when we move to the next one, another thing which especially lying in the big or large corporate organization will be the access retention, which is falling under the IPP 9. One of the key concerns will be the continued retention of personal information more than the stipulated legal requirements. Especially when the technology is improving, this is actually happening in a more frequent manner. One of the key liability will be this issue of a civil liability, especially about the heightened risk of unauthorized access. These kind of unauthorized access, including the information, the details, the personal sensitive information as well about the customers or the different entities. How is the corporation handling the retention without the assessment will be one of the very key concern we are looking into. One of the best practices we suggest will be the review and updated documents retention policy, together with the establishment of clear retention period, which is what we are trying to focus. One of the major things is like the review and the updates of a policy should stick with the real situation of the movement of the market regulations and customer or clients reflections or input to make sure it's appropriate one. The implementation of a proactive risk management strategy and the establishment of a robust data protection framework is also very important. One of the legal risks will be the non-compliance with the data minimization principles and as well as the exposure of data breaches. Regarding the access retention, Privacy Act in Section 123 provide the regulatory sanctions and audits. The other part for the key obligation and the implication that we derive from the report will be the monitoring gaps. The potential for the risk arise from the long exposure of personal information attributed to the absence of the ethic monitoring. How long is an appropriate period? This is always a topic that's being discussed. While the violation of IPP5 lists clearly that the violation will be subject to legal penalties and increased liability for data breaches. For the KiwiTel, we recommend that the regular voluntary testing is being carried out. We'll have the professional legal advisors in-house, as well as the third-party management bodies and entities to make sure that the gaps is well monitored. We also need to make sure that KiwiTel is a very large-scale service provider across the nation. We are sticking with the industry standards, especially incorporating the continuous monitoring and evaluation. So in the overall conclusion, or we will say the potential summary of potential liability, one of the key things is the regulatory penalties under the Privacy Act 2020, the civil litigation from affected individual. For example, if some of the individuals or body, they are not satisfied of how we manage the data or the data policy, there will maybe civil litigation arise. They're also increasing the potential cost and manpower, labor hour from outside. Most importantly, the reputational damage that leading to the revenue loss or potential drop in the turnover. The other big factor we will need to look into will be the contractual breaches with any other third-party vendors, service providers, or customer. For the QVTel, a very large-scale corporate company, there are some practical steps we're trying to suggest to mitigate those potential risks or foreseeable risks. As we always say, the reduction of the risk, the mitigation is always the best way to increase the security and the reputation from the customers. First of all, we'll conduct a privacy impact assessment. We call it PIA, based on the info, the database we have, to make sure that our current policy is in line, or if it's not, what the space for improvement we can do. We have the regular updates of the data retention and destruction policies. This is a very key point because there are increasing concerns of many parties arising for the long period of the information stored in particular database or company. This is what we will have to address to make sure the customer is feeling safe. We introduce a mandatory staff privacy training in terms of compliance, data collection, data handling, and the disputes in regards to the customer database and the third party and all the information under the QVTel. The training, it will be definitely useful to make sure everyone of the staff, of the contractors, they are in line, they are updated with the current company policies and the relevant acts, to make sure they know how to handle, who to report to, and make sure everything will be well documented. And then we'll implement privacy by design in all systems, make sure they're all aligned, and engage third-party risk management to make sure our review of this policy will be in line. Last but not least, we establish a clear data breach response plan. When there is an incident, whether it's a single incident, continuous incident, a service failure, or IT technical issues, we follow the SOP for the procedures to make sure we are responding in the correct way and the proper way. In conclusion, the QVTel situation demonstrates the importance of taking proactive approach to the privacy governance and information governance. Now, in the evolving world, the QVTel as a large-scale company, there will be more domestic and international customers and service we are engaging with. We need to be very sticking with the policy changes. We need to stick with the changing environment to make sure we are up to date and providing legal, legitimate data protection policy. Data security measures must be strengthened. The policy regards to data retention has to be reviewed, and the staff need to be trained and held accountable to build the customer trust, and our brand reputation, and our service quality. I guess that will be the all of our presentation regarding the risk and the factor we found in the our case study. In the whole report, we are trying to reference through the New Zealand Privacy Act, including the IPP5, IPP9, and 11. They are the major principles we're sticking with, together with the support of reports. Now, I know it's only Greg and me joining this presentation, but also love to contribute acknowledge the contribution from the other two teammates, Claire and Shi. Without them, the presentation will not work. So thank you, everyone. And I hope you enjoy and have a clear message, clear output through this presentation.